It was hard for me to feel much American or French because I never lived there. I never lived in France. And I never lived in the US until I was 18 and then went to LA for college. But then I didn't feel Spanish when I was living in Spain, even though I could speak Spanish, but I'm not a local.
Glad to have you, amazing viewer. It's another exciting time, another educational video, collection of TikTok videos. I must mention that.
Good start. Who is a third culture kid? Let's find out.
If you're raised in 2 or 3 different countries, there's actually a word for that. Third culture kids.
This is what is called a third culture kid.
I've lived in Russia, the US, Japan, Kazakhstan, and the United Arab Emirates. I moved so much because of my dad's job. He works in the oil business.
Here's a framework I found on Google and it does a really good job mapping the complex identity issues that third culture kids face. A key feature in the third culture kid experience is feeling like they belong neither here nor there, but in between. It's a very difficult experience that not a lot of people know even exists. I like to think of it as a transcultural and transnational identity.
Let's look at some of the experiences that they go through as third culture kids. How is their life like? How is their lifestyle? What are their experiences? What are their challenges? Are they happy to be in the state where they have to face this identity crisis? And sometimes it's even hard to ask them, where are you from? So they get confused in between. They can't tell exactly where they're from.
I am a third culture kid, unbound to the ties of here or there. There are multitudes of who I am and how I create. My creations are sometimes traditional and sometimes have no name. Although challenging, growing up in a household with both parents and child learning how to speak Lauglish and then exiting the door into a society opposite of the Sabai life. These experiences are part of building an unpaved path for the new. Once you're able to clear the debris, there's so much beauty in enjoying both of these worlds. My cooking is about preserving the past, but also evolving the present. It's a balancing act of knowing when to walk or run. Growing up in Wisconsin, my household always had bread to make a delicious ham and cheese sandwich to bring to school, yet I ate somu and kaunio at home. It was like my taste buds were learning how to dance, sometimes tripping over my own foot, but eventually learning how to tango in both cultures. Now, the sandwich is a hug of the old and new because I can be confident in understanding my Lao flavor without leaving my third culture behind. This is my Lao food in America.
Things I think that all third culture kids can relate to. Hi, I'm Christina. I'm an American who spent my whole childhood and growing up years in Tunisia. And if you're a third culture kid or a TCK, let me know in the comments how many of these you understand. Starting off strong, we have the number one thing I think all TCKs relate to, and that is people asking where you're from and you not knowing how to answer. They look at me, they hear me talk, they say, oh, you're American. So what state did you grow up in? I say, actually, I grew up in Tunisia. They don't even know where that is, first of all. But then they ask me where I was born, and I tell them that I was born in France. So then it gets a lot more complicated. The second thing I think all third culture kids can relate to that I only realized was the thing because I mentioned it in a recent viral video and so many people related to it is thinking that everyone was born with a passport. Like I said, I was born in France, so immediately after I was born, I had a passport in order to travel. And it wasn't until I was like late elementary school that I realized that not everyone is born with a passport. I legitimately thought that a passport was just like a birth certificate and everyone had one. I genuinely don't mean that to sound privileged. I'm just being honest with what that was like. Number 3, we have saying so many goodbyes. Personally, I'm the kind of TCK that spent most of my childhood in the same spot. I lived in Tunisia my whole life and didn't move to any other countries other than being born in France, which I don't remember. But I know some third culture kids who move to a different country every 2 years and they've said so many goodbyes. But I don't think it matters if you're the one leaving or if you're the one being left. If you're a TCK, you have said so many goodbyes in your lifetime. Next up we have, if you're a TCK who's traveled a lot, having security at the airport down so fast unless you get stopped. When I get to the airport, I have everything down to a T. I know exactly what time to take my shoes off, when to pull my laptop out, when to pull my liquids out. And if you've traveled a lot and you're a TCK, I think you can relate to that, unless of course you get pulled over. Maybe you get pulled over because you're an American coming from Tunisia, maybe the country doesn't like the stamps in your passport, or maybe like a friend of mine, your middle name's in Arabic. Let me know what you relate to and if you want to see the rest of them.
What is one thing you like about being a third culture kid?
Unlike kids my age, I get to see a lot more things around the world. The average kid from the country I'm from sees one country maybe every 15 years. I've lived in 5 and I've been to 22 already.
What is like a downside of being a third culture kid?
A downside of being a third culture kid is, for example, like you grew up in one place and you have a friend that you had for 15 years that you can count on, you rely on, and you call them whenever you're in trouble and whatnot. me, friends are not as constant for me because as soon as I actually get a friend, I move, and because we don't get to see each other that often because they go somewhere else, I go somewhere else, it's not as concrete type of a friendship.
I grew up as a third culture kid, and here's why I loved it. Aside from the fact that I got to travel the world, I got to grow up in countries like Malaysia, Egypt, South Africa. These are countries that, for the most part, don't live by Western ideals. So hustle culture was never really a part of my growing up. Most of the countries that I lived in had a very calming way of life, and community was a huge part of most of the experience of growing up in these countries. So the people that I was surrounded with, these were people that prioritized community and prioritized helping each other, growing together, and I think that's a really cool way to grow up. Another huge privilege of growing up as a third culture kid is that you get to really gain another level of perspective that people who don't move around much in their lives simply aren't able to get, because inevitably, if you grow up in one kind of society or one kind of culture, you are inundated with the same messaging and the same perspective on life for most of your life. But when you get to move to different countries, and countries that have such diverse worldviews, you ultimately gain the perspective that life can be lived in so many different ways. And it was always really comforting to know that one specific way of life was not my only choice. I could choose many different ways of living as someone who has technically settled in a Western country. It comforts me to know that I can always pick up and move somewhere and know that that way of living is just fine as well. Another huge benefit is that you gain such a profound level of independence. My mindset grew up faster than I did, which is to say that I feel like I witnessed and experienced things as a kid that allowed me to expand my perspective and expand my knowledge on the world a lot younger. And it gave me the tools to know that I can always rely on myself. And that means today I am not afraid to go to a new place by myself. I'm not afraid to travel by myself. Even as a woman, I'm not afraid to do those things because I had that experience so early on. And I know that I can rely on myself. And that is something that is priceless.
Ask your parents questions. Their answers might be really healing.
So for us third culture kids, this isn't as easy because let's face it, we can't really ask our parents those questions. They don't really open up. But I just want to share something. I remember like years ago, I asked my dad if he ever was depressed growing up, like if he ever questioned his life purpose, like did he ever feel like left out or lost in the world? And his answer was so interesting. He said, I didn't have time. And just a background, my father growing up, he was the only child raised in the village. His brothers and sisters were all raised in England. He didn't get the opportunity or the fortune to be raised there. So he was raised in Pakistan, and he had to look after his parents whilst also looking after the farm and while also going to school. And his education was paid for by my parents, who worked hard. Sorry, his parents. And there was pressure for him to get to uni, and he was the only one in the family to do that in his family. And it wasn't easy because he wasn't academically bright. So he had all this pressure going on. Like as soon as he finished school, he had to go home, then put the cows back in the barn, whatever he did. But like, it was just interesting, his answer, that he didn't have time. His mind was constantly on the run. And then once he got his degree, then he married my mum and had to move to England. He had to give up that life. So then when he was over in England, he had to constantly just think, like, how am I going to make money? How am I going to raise kids here? Are the kids going to be safe? Dealing with racism. So when he did answer that, it made me realize, wow, how privileged we do have it. And it's not our fault, but like as third culture kids, we're raised away from our motherland. We're raised in this unique world that our parents and not a lot of people would understand, where we speak a different language, we see the world in like two different ways. But I realized that we do have that time to think about life, to stress about pointless stuff. And it was just interesting hearing that from my father, where he didn't have time to think about that stuff. And maybe that explains all the stress that he had in his life then after, because he was always thinking, he didn't have time to just be peaceful. But it is true what this woman's saying, that you should ask your parents questions. Yes, it's not easy. Like, trust me, after that, I asked my dad that question. It was a 5-hour discussion about how hard his life was, and I was like, I wish I didn't ask him. But at the same time, there was those like little golden nuggets of, wow, like, we do have a lot of time here to think of that stuff. So yeah, I thought I'd just share that.
If you identify as a third culture kid, then how do you answer the question, where are you from? You see, me personally, I was born in India. When I was 4, I moved to Kuwait. And then at 12, I moved to Dubai. And when I was 18, I moved to New York. Coming to New York and attending university, people would ask me, where am I from? And I wouldn't know exactly what to say to them. That is because if I said India, it wouldn't exactly feel right to me because I haven't lived there since I was 4. And if I said Dubai, that wouldn't technically be correct because I hold an Indian passport. And that doesn't even cover the fact that I ignore the 8 years that I spent in Kuwait, that my parents grew up in West Bengal, but they're from Rajasthan, and I also have family in Indore. So I'm just thinking to myself, where am I from? Eventually, I just settled to answer the question with, I'm from Dubai, because to me, that's home. Throughout this process, the one thing that I've learned is your identity is never restricted. It's constantly evolving and it's multidimensional. Now, I know for a fact that immigrants with a similar story to mine exist. So, where are you from? What is your story?
Wow, this is so fascinating. These are people living a whole complete different experience. So it's important for us to know the dynamics, to know the things that people have to go through depending on their origin. Just imagine, third culture kid, you can't answer a simple question, where are you from? So just I felt like if we come to understand the dynamics, we'll be able to ask people questions that are really not offensive to them, you know, and whatever answer they give to us, don't really bother like question their answers. Some people get a very hard time explaining to people what their origins are, because people don't seem to understand. Even when they're given an answer, they want evidence, they want to be convinced, they want, like, it's so hard sometimes when you scroll through the comments of people explaining themselves to others. Somebody's just come to share their experience on TikTok, and people just propagate a lot of hate. They say, oh, what is that? Like, yeah, so it's better we educate ourselves on the things that are happening rather than making it harder for those who are going through the experiences. Listen to this trend.
We're third culture kids. We have 10 time zones open in our clock app, and we have friends in every single one.
We're third culture kids. I get to tell people about countries they didn't even know existed.
We're third culture kids. My wedding had traditions from 3 different cultures because how could I pick just one?
We're third culture kids. We have friends everywhere, yet nowhere.
Aww. We're third culture kids. I don't feel at home in my passport country, but everyone thinks I'm a tourist in my host country.
Bro, that's rough.
I know.
We're third culture kids. I can understand Arabic conversations around me, but no one knows.
We're third culture kids. Of course we can create a packing list in under 2 minutes.
We're third culture kids. Of course we're gonna try every local food.
We're third culture kids. We've said enough goodbyes to last a lifetime.
We're third culture kids. We have friends on every continent.
We're third culture kids. Of course I'm gonna have an identity crisis every few months.
We're third culture kids. I've only seen my cousins a few times in my whole life.
So sad.
We're third culture kids.
There's a lot more to this. There's a lot we can speak about. So there's a lot of experiences that they go through. So yeah, briefly, that was it. That's who they are. Third culture kids. You know, when somebody tells you where they're from, just know that, just don't really make it harder for them to understand. They're already going through challenges, they're already going through a crisis, and don't make it a lot more harder. We are living in a diverse world. We're living in a world that is not just the way you see it. You know, these are people with like 1,000 perspectives to life. So when they tell you where they're from, when they share their culture, when they behave in a certain way, don't really feel bothered, you know. Yeah, accept. So embrace each other with love, and also, yeah, don't make it harder than it already is for them, you know. Yeah, that was it about this video. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, share the video, comment, subscribe to the channel. I appreciate your love and support. Goodbye for now.